If you can hear the fans, you're just going to have to deal with it because it is way too hot to not have the fans on right now. Drink of choice is Sunkist 10. I want to implore you guys, and you know who I'm talking to, everyone who hated Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice, I want to implore you all to kindly shut up. Now, I'm not telling you necessarily that you're all wrong, but I am just going to say that I'm going to share my opinion on it, right? But the thing I'm hopefully going to convince somebody to do out there is just to stop leveling this campaign of hate against the movie, because I have seen so many goddamn hit pieces, and I thought hit pieces were only, designated to the political arena, right? But I have seen so many goddamn hit pieces, articles designed primarily and only to make this movie look bad, that it's kind of creepy almost. Like, we get it already, you don't like the movie. It's fine, you don't have to like the movie. I'm not going to tell you that you have to like Batman vs. Superman. But what I think is a little bit ridiculous is when we start talking about the numbers of the movie and start calling it a failure and, all these ridiculous, stupid claims that don't hold any water, they don't hold any weight whatsoever. There's no validity to them at all. You're talking about, but the weekend numbers dropped significantly. They dropped worse than they even dropped when Fantastic Four came out. That means it's a failure. No. Because with Fantastic Four, you can look at the numbers. You can look at how much it earned domestic box office and foreign box office, and you can see for yourself it didn't even earn back its budget. So obviously that was a failure. It's undeniable that that was a failure, all right? And if you can look and see that it didn't earn back its budget domestic for that movie, and then you can look and compare that to Batman vs. Superman and see that it has actually earned back its entire budget domestic, and we're talking about the budget itself. We're not talking about the additional money that they spend on advertising and stuff like that. I'm just talking about the budget here, all right? So when you can take a look at the budget, the listed budget number, and see that for Fantastic Four, domestic, they didn't earn that money back for the budget. But for Batman vs. Superman, domestic, they did earn that money back. Then it's really not fair to try and compare it to Batman vs. Superman on that one metric and say that on that one metric it was that Fantastic Four performed better than Batman vs. Superman, and therefore Batman vs. Superman is a failure. That doesn't make any sense. The studio isn't going to see it as a failure if they're getting money in their fucking wallets. So shut up. That's what I'm seeing that's really bothering me. Things like that. And that's just, the hit pieces do not stop. They keep looking for every little indication they can find that, it was a failure, see, it sucks, see, my opinion is validated. Like, okay, we get it, we know, I understand that you really want to have your opinion validated on this, alright? I get that having your opinion validated feels really good, it makes you feel good inside, but it shouldn't be the end-all be-all, alright? It shouldn't be that goddamn important to you to have your opinion on this matter, on a fucking movie, validated, alright? Now that I've gotten that out of the way, that's my major complaint. That's my major thing that I take issue with when it comes to Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice. Because honestly, you can have whatever opinion you want to about it. I'm not going to tell you how to feel about this movie. If you didn't like it, you didn't like it, you don't have to like it, alright? But at the same time, you don't have to keep leveling this campaign of hate against it, and you don't have to keep trying to find validation of your opinion everywhere. That is a sign of mental illness. Knock it off. Like, a lot of people feel the same way that you do about the movie. Is that not validation enough? All right? You've gotten your validation several times over. Can you stop with the hit pieces? Can you stop with all the articles specifically intended to try and make this movie look even worse than it already has been made to look by all these fucking articles? So, with that point out of the way, now that I've talked about that, let's sweep that off. And let's get to talking about the movie itself, alright? I want to talk about how I felt about the movie, what I thought about the movie, what my opinions were, what my review of the movie essentially is. I don't necessarily want to get into a review, but I do want to say that I felt like, after having watched it twice, I have been to the theater twice to see this movie, and I have seen it twice. Once in 3D, once not in 3D. And I have to say that after having seen it twice, it's a 7.5 out of 10 for me. I think it's a very good movie on several different levels, and it does several different things very well. You know, it's definitely hampered. It's definitely not perfect, but it's still a really good movie in my opinion. But before I get into details about that kind of thing, about my feelings on the movie and kind of some of the reasons that I liked it, with hopefully without getting into too deep of spoiler territory, I do want to talk about the numbers for a second, because a lot of people keep looking at the numbers and saying it's a failure, right? Because it didn't make $800 million yet or something like that. I'm going to look at Box Office Mojo right the fuck now. BoxOfficeMojo.com. If you really care about the numbers that a movie is making at the box office, then you should know Box Office Mojo by now. The movie was released on March 25th. It is April 10th right now as I record this. Just turned April 10th. It's 1:30 in the morning. So far, worldwide, the movie has made $742 million. Everybody keeps saying, oh, it has to make that 800 million mark. It has to make that 800 million mark. Well, let me tell you something about the 800 million mark, all right? The budget for the movie, production budget, was $250 million, right? Okay. So with that number in hand and understood, you can also tack on the amount of money that they probably spent on advertising. And it's Batman versus Superman. You've seen a lot of advertising for this movie, so chances are they spent a good bit of money on that. I would say that they even went so far as to spend maybe twice as much as the production budget on advertising this movie. So $500 million in advertising for Batman vs. Superman, I can totally 100% see that being a reality. I don't know if it is, but I can see that being the case. The reason people think it's going to need to make at least $800 million back in order to make back its budget and the advertising dollars and all that, the reason that they think that is because of an old adage, essentially, in the film industry, wherein you essentially add 3 times the budget of the movie, and 3 times the budget of the movie is what you're going to have to make in order to pay for everything that was, all the costs that were associated, not just the production budget, you know? So when they look at that and they look at the amount of advertising and all that, somebody came up with a figure of between $800 million and $1 billion in order to pay back everything that they had spent on the movie. Okay, so the problem with this theory, the problem with the add on 3 times the amount, is that it isn't always true 100% of the time, number one. Number two, that adage is very old. The assumption of the amount of money that they're spending on advertising is very old. It's somewhat outdated in this day and age. And it's not to say that it doesn't happen still very frequently, I would say, but more that there are new things that have come to light since that was the adage, since that was the way that things were very frequently in the movie industry. Like, we're talking about, this was true in the late 90s, right? Before social media, before things like that. So before you could actually feasibly do advertising for a movie without spending millions and millions and millions of dollars, no matter what you do. So I'm not going to say that they don't spend a lot of money on advertising anymore, but I will say that the old adage of add 3 times the budget isn't necessarily always accurate anymore. I believe that it might be somewhat accurate for Batman vs. Superman, but I do not think that it's incredibly accurate. I don't think necessarily that that's entirely true. It might be true, but Warner Brothers hasn't really released that information yet, so it's difficult to know really exactly how much they spent on this movie. And quite frankly, they're probably going to write it off anyways, because even the big budget movies that make lots of money, they find a way of adding in that the distribution costs, and they'll always say, well, distribution costs were between 200 and 400 million, so therefore the movie didn't make any money. And then they can say that because it didn't make any money, they don't have to pay so and so for whatever it is. It's a little trick that they use in the movie industry in order to avoid paying people for their work, essentially. It's shitty. It's really shitty, and it really needs to stop. But, you know, no matter what you do, they're going to declare this one a flop. They're going to declare this one a movie that didn't make money. But then they did that for Lord of the Rings, too. Just so everybody knows, they declared Lord of the Rings to be a movie that didn't make any money as well. So if you're thinking, like, oh, see, there's the bullet, there's the proof. Like, no. No matter what they do at this point, they're going to declare this one to be a flop, or, you know, didn't make any money. But the reality is that it's probably already making money. You know, when you factor in the lower costs for advertising today, the more reach that you get with advertising today for less money, chances are that the 3 times thing doesn't really hold water anymore, and it's probably not accurate anymore. In the case of Batman vs. Superman, yeah, it's possible that they spent that much on it, but it's not entirely likely. You know, maybe they spent $1 billion on this movie, but maybe they just spent like 750 or 700 million on it. Maybe they're already making money on this thing. So, you know, people try to say, well, it's not a success, it's a flop, it's not doing anything. Like, and they're comparing it to Fantastic Four, right? And I'm just like, how can you compare it to a movie that did that fucking poorly? Come on. This movie is already outpacing that one in every possible way. You're talking about the numbers needed to earn back the advertising budget. Fantastic Four didn't even earn back the production budget, let alone the fucking advertising budget. So don't even begin to talk to me about this being bigger of a failure. It's not. It's identifiably, provably not more of a failure, all right? And it's not even at all a failure. Give it another week or two, and this movie will have earned back its budget and then some, and the advertising budget on top of that, because of the foreign market. Because of the foreign market. And that's the thing that everybody forgets about, and it's easy to forget about, because for the longest time, the foreign market wasn't even a factor for movie studios. They didn't even factor it in. For the longest time, movie studios would not consider the foreign gross. They really wouldn't. They'd only even if the movie was sold in foreign markets, they would only focus on the domestic numbers, and if the movie did not earn back its production budget in domestic numbers, it was considered a flop. It was considered a movie that didn't make its money back, didn't make money, and it was, you know, written off, and, you know, it just didn't do well, and they didn't make any more sequels of it, right? They didn't make any more movies in that supposed franchise or whatever, if there was a franchise to be had, right? We're living in a different world today, and the Transformers movies actually are proof of that. The Transformers movies are proof of the different Hollywood era that we live in today versus the Hollywood era that we lived in even in like 2006. The last 10 years have had a significant impact on how Hollywood decides to make movies, how they count the numbers, and what markets really that they look at. Because again, for the longest time, late 90s, even into the early 2000s, they would focus more on domestic than anything else. Domestic was the most important thing to them, right? So literally they wouldn't consider any other market than the US market. If the US market didn't like it, then they wouldn't make it. So it didn't matter to them if the movie did well in foreign markets. If it didn't do well in US market, they wouldn't make it, because for them at that time, the US market was their bread and butter. It was always assumed that they had to appeal to the US market first, and then if the foreign market liked it, great. That was essentially their attitude about it. But you can tell now that just in the last 10 years, their attitudes on this matter have changed significantly. Because when you look at the Transformers movies, what you see is that after the second movie, the third movie does significantly worse in the US market than it did in the foreign market. It made like $340 million, I think, in the US market, which I think it had a budget of like 195, or was it maybe 210 million? It was around 200 million, right? It made back its budget, right? It made back its budget domestic at 343 million, or something around there. I can't remember exactly how much it was, but it was over 300 million. It made back its budget, but not significantly. It made back enough to consider making another movie, right? But not significantly to the point where it was like, oh yeah, we got to keep this going. We got to keep this gravy train going. It was more like, actually, this is a significant drop-off in domestic numbers from what we were seeing with the last two movies, right? It was a steady decline in domestic numbers for the Transformers series, because people were getting fucking tired of it, rightfully so. It's not a good series. What's interesting about that is that the third movie, Dark of the Moon, is also the first time that we start seeing the movie earning more money in foreign markets than it earned in domestic markets. So literally, and I'm not making this up, it made $771 million in foreign markets. This meant that the movie had earned over $1 billion. Dark of the Moon earned over $1 billion worldwide. Did you know that? Most people didn't know that. So yeah, it earned over $1 billion worldwide, and so that's why, not because of the domestic 300 million, but because of the 771 foreign, that's why they decided to make a fourth Transformers movie. And lo and behold, the fourth Transformers movie, Age of Extinction, you know, the one you hated, it made $850 million on the foreign market. It made back about like 200 to 250 million here, something like that, something in that range. The production budget was again around $200 million. So for a production budget that's $200 million, and then the domestic number just barely accounts for that production budget, but you look over and you see that the foreign market paid $850 million to see this movie. Do you really think that it was the domestic number paying back just the production budget, just barely, that convinced the studios that we're going to make a Transformers 5, 6, and 7? Because if you really think that, you are completely and totally insane. It is the $850 million that they made in foreign markets that convinced them to keep the Transformers series going. They made so much money on that movie, more than they did on Dark of the Moon, I might add. And especially, they made more money than they did on Dark of the Moon in foreign markets. Enough so that they decided, you know what, we're making so much money off of these movies that we just have to keep this franchise going. Transformers 5, 6, and 7 are happening, all right? They are planned and they are actually going to happen, all right? So that's something that you need to consider. That's something you need to factor in. Because what that tells you is that studios today actually do, especially with the big budget blockbusters, they actually do care more about the foreign numbers than they do about the domestic numbers. They're not necessarily trying to appeal with their movies to us. They're not trying to appeal to the US market anymore. They don't care if the US market likes the movie. We are now like second run to the foreign market. And some of you might be pissed off about that, but that's really the reality of what's happening now. Is we are now the ones that they say, well, if they like it, then cool, but if not, whatever. It's the foreign market that they really care about. And the foreign market, Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice, has made so far on the foreign market $463.5 million. And that number is only getting bigger at a much greater rate than the domestic numbers for Batman vs. Superman, which are the numbers that everybody likes to point at and say, oh, see, it's a failure. I'd like to point out that domestic, it has earned $279 million. The production budget was $250 million. Again, proof positive. There's no way to legitimately say this was a worse movie or even a worse performing movie than Fantastic Four. So shut up on that stupid, illegitimate point. What I find interesting about this, what I find interesting about all of this, all the hit pieces that keep on pointing at the goddamn numbers, what I find most interesting about the numbers is the story that they tell about Hollywood today and how Hollywood has changed. How Hollywood doesn't necessarily care about the US market and what we think about movies anymore. They're more focused on making movies that the foreign markets want to see. And there are a lot of foreign markets out there that have not had the opportunity to see a lot of the big, bombastic Hollywood blockbusters that have been coming out of the studios for decades now, right? It's not every day, or it was for the longest time, not every day that those movies would hit their neck of the woods, right? So now that we're living in a more global movie village, so to speak, now that they do release these movies globally at the same time, from time to time, it's easy to see how the foreign market plays a huge role in defining whether or not a movie is successful today. And it plays a huge role in defining whether or not the studios want to continue with the franchise or not, or whether or not they consider a movie a success, even if they won't define it as such, you know? The studios do not seem to be quaking in their boots, although like Warner Brothers does not seem to be unhappy with the numbers, although everyone keeps suggesting that they are. I don't see that at all. I don't see any sign at all that is a legitimate sign that they are in any way, shape, or form concerned about the numbers for Batman vs. Superman. In fact, whenever they've been asked, they have come out and said, actually, we're fairly happy with the numbers. These are pretty good. We're happy with this. And there's two reasons for that. One, it's the foreign numbers coming in, indicating that they're going to make back at least $800 million, if not over $1 billion when all is said and done within the next 3 or 4 weeks. Because the movie's going to be out for a little bit longer, especially in the foreign markets. They're going to keep that movie out for a little bit longer, I gotta figure. So, there's a good chance that not only is it going to break that 800 million mark, which it's very quickly approaching, but also that it's going to break the $1 billion mark. So this whole concept that, it's not successful, nobody liked it. No, more than anything, it was American audiences, a lot of American audiences that didn't like it. Foreign audiences are eating it the fuck up because, quite frankly, foreign audiences like to see big, bombastic Hollywood blockbusters that go over the top and shit. And the proof of this is in the pudding when you look at Transformers movies. Maybe they're not good. Foreign audiences don't care if they're good. They want to see big explosions. They want to see lots of special effects. They want to see Hollywood blockbusters from people like Michael Bay. I'm not exactly happy about that, but it doesn't hurt when a movie that actually isn't that bad, Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice, also appeals to them on some level, and they end up going to see the movie in droves, more so than even we did. So, you know, people keep thinking that they're the only ones that matter, that the U.S. audience is the only ones that, we're the only ones that matter, but that's not true anymore. The world of movies as we know it, the Hollywood world as you have known it for all your life, it's changed. It's not the same anymore. Things are changing. I see no indication that that's going to change anytime soon. Until the foreigners start getting tired of the same old from Hollywood that we are already getting tired of now, we're not going to see a change in how Hollywood does things. They're going to keep coming out with these kinds of movies. Deal with it. That's all I got to say to that. It's like, I'm not necessarily happy with that, but in every single case, right? But that doesn't mean I'm not going to accept it, because it's reality. Accept reality for what it is. The foreign market still eats this shit up, so they're going to keep making this shit. So deal with it. So now that I've talked your ear off about the goddamn foreign market, let me just talk about the movie for a few minutes, alright? Because I know a lot of people did not like this movie, and I know they had their reasons, but it really is actually a fairly good movie, alright? So let me explain why I think it's a good movie. First of all, I want to talk about the music. Hans Zimmer, who has since declared that he's done with superhero flicks, he's not going to do any more superhero flicks. After seeing his efforts in Amazing Spider-Man 2, can't necessarily blame him. That was a hot mess. That was a dumpster fire. That was horrible. That was the worst effort I've ever seen from Hans Zimmer. But in the case of Batman vs. Superman, I actually, like, having gone to see it twice now, I actually really did like a lot of the themes. The problem was that it was so jumbled. There was no one theme for the movie. He had separate themes for each major character. So he had a separate theme for Batman, he had a separate theme for Superman, and he had a separate theme for Wonder Woman. He even had a separate theme for Lex Luthor. So you've got 4 themes going on, contending for time and play in this movie at the same time. It makes it feel jumbled. It makes it feel like they aren't really sure what theme they want to go with here. That's not necessarily the case, though. He's like laying the groundwork for a musical theme for each individual character. So I can totally see them using the theme that Hans Zimmer did for Wonder Woman in the new Wonder Woman movie. And then that being like a huge and important part of the theme for Wonder Woman in that movie, right? And they focus pretty much heavily on that one theme, right? They'll have a few other themes for Wonder Woman in the Wonder Woman movie, I have no doubt. But it won't be like a wildly different theme that's clearly intended for another character or something like that. You know what I mean? Superman, he had the same theme in a lot of ways that he had in Man of Steel. In fact, you hear a lot of the same music from Man of Steel in Batman vs. Superman when Superman makes an appearance on screen. I actually like that because I liked that score from Hans Zimmer. I thought that he did a really good job on Man of Steel, so I really liked that. But what really shocked me listening to it a second time when I went to see it is how much I liked the Batman theme and how much it stuck in my head, because there's this somberness to it, this almost moroseness to it that is absolutely palpable and almost heartbreaking in a way. It's so like the folly of man, that you can hear the folly of man in that theme, and I love it. And I really hope that they stick with that theme in Batman's movie that he's going to have at some point that Ben Affleck is supposedly has written the treatment for and wants to direct. I'm totally down with a Ben Affleck directed Batman movie because Ben Affleck is a fantastic director and he did a pretty damn good job as Batfleck. And yeah, I mean, if they stick with that Hans Zimmer theme for Batman, I will be so happy because it is hauntingly beautiful. Now, with that being said, as I just said, you know, when you put all these things together, they feel all jumbled, right? That's the problem. That was the problem with the themes. Not that they themselves were bad. They were actually taken on their own individual basis. Each theme for each hero was actually quite good. It was very good. But the problem is that you've got one theme for one sequence, for one scene, and then you've got another theme for another hero in another sequence and another scene, and then you've got another theme for another hero in another sequence and another scene. Like, it doesn't work well when you have all these different themes contending for time. It works better when you can have one theme, one solid theme coming in at an important time in a movie about a superhero, and then you have the conflict theme for that superhero, and then potentially you have a theme that's more about like the anger or the sadness that that hero feels as well when something maybe doesn't go their way. And then eventually you return to the base theme of it again. It's not just something that happens in superhero themes. It also happens just in really good movies in general. That's just a kind of a trope of composing scores for film in general, for large bombastic films at that. One I'm thinking of immediately that's like that is The Aviator. If you listen to The Aviator, you hear a variety of themes, but there's that one big theme that's the hero theme, as I would call it, right? And the thing is, they have hero themes for each individual hero in Batman vs. Superman, and individually they're really good. And if they were in their own individual movie, you would have the opportunity to have the individual superhero theme, the morose, the da-da-da-da-da, and then return to the individual superhero theme to remind people of that theme and get it stuck in their head and get it catching on and get them feeling all pumped up and everything, right? You don't get to do that with Batman vs. Superman of Dawn of Justice because you've got too many goddamn cooks in the kitchen. And this is the same thing that people have been pointing out. If you go, I highly advise you, by the way, to go check out Andre, Black Nerd Comedy. Go check out his review of Batman vs. Superman because it is absolutely on point. The problem here isn't necessarily that it's a Batman vs. Superman movie. It's that Dawn of Justice part. It's that we have to shove this Justice League thing in there at the same time. Like, ugh. This movie could have been so much better if they didn't feel like they had to have so many different goddamn characters with so many different goddamn themes contending for time. It just suffered as a result of that, quite frankly. But that being said, it was still fairly well done. Like, when I think about a problem like that, I immediately harken back to Spider-Man 3, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 3. Because with Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 3, we can all come to the same conclusion that Sam Raimi himself and all the other filmmakers attached to the movie have come to, which is that, of course, too many goddamn cooks in the kitchen. There was too much going on. The studios wanted him to put too much into the fucking movie. The studios like, we need to introduce this character and this character and this character and this character. And there were just one too many characters in that movie. If there had been one fewer character, one character less in that movie, it probably would have been a much better movie. And you look at Amazing Spider-Man 2, it's very much the same thing. They have too many fucking people in that movie, right? And that's where you start to make mistakes with superhero movies. I think by now they would have figured it out, but apparently they still haven't. You can't have too many goddamn cooks in the kitchen. You can't have too many superheroes up on screen at the same goddamn time. Unless, of course, that's what they're supposed to be doing, like Justice League or Guardians of the Galaxy or whatever, what have you, because usually in those cases they don't really have their individual themes, or if they do, their individual themes are kind of melded and molded into the main superhero team theme. You know what I mean? That's why that works in terms of the music, right? But, you know, it's also just very hard when you're trying to introduce all these different characters. And these characters come from wildly different backgrounds, and you have to pay homage and respect to all these different characters, although they come from all these different, wildly different backgrounds. It makes it incredibly, incredibly difficult to actually manage that and do it well enough that it doesn't feel like you're just throwing these people up on the screen. And quite frankly, Zack Snyder has done a fucking excellent job of that with Batman vs. Superman. There have been a lot of great analyses of this movie from people who enjoyed it, people who didn't enjoy it, what have you. And they've been pointing out all these different things that happen in the movie that are like, you know, you wouldn't catch it if you weren't looking for it, but if you do look for it, you can see how it keeps things together on a thread, so to speak. There is a thread in this movie, and if you are able to follow that thread, it works, right? It all makes sense. It's all part of the plan, and it's all like solidly interwoven plot material, you know what I mean? It doesn't feel like it's all just thrown in there necessarily. Everything makes sense where it's supposed to be, which is why when people said, well, I don't get it, it doesn't make any sense to me, why is this happening, why is that happening? Well, first of all, if you don't understand why this thing is happening or that thing is happening, I implore you to go read a comic book. Go read the comics. Go read the Batman Frank Miller comics. Go read the Batman the Justice League comics. Go read some comics of The Flash. Go read some comics of Wonder Woman. Go read some comics of Superman and Batman individually. Just go read some DC comics, alright? Because almost everything that happens in the movie has an impetus and is calling back to something that happened in the comics. Now, it's not all exactly the same. Zack Snyder is obviously putting his own spin on it, so to speak. I don't have a problem with that, because a creator can do whatever he goddamn well pleases to do with the fucking source material, right? Frank Miller did whatever he goddamn well pleased to do with Batman. He took Batman in a completely different direction from where Batman was originally, and everybody loves him for it. So why now that Zack Snyder is doing something his own way and trying to make quote-unquote his own Seven Samurai or Magnificent Seven kind of version of the Justice League, so to speak, why, when he tries to do something like that, is it frowned upon? Why is that frowned upon? Why is it not okay for him to do his vision of these characters, but it's okay for all these other comic book creators to do their vision of it? Especially when his vision is hearkening back to the vision of all these other great creators and just taking a slightly different spin on it for very good reason. He has a reason for taking this spin on it, because he has a legitimate vision that is actually quite interesting if you actually take a moment to try and understand what's actually going on there. So there are moments in this movie, there are dream sequences. That's the only thing I would say that are not really explained very well in the movie. Because, you know, most people, they're familiar with dream sequences as being, well, we're going to tip you off that this is a dream sequence with this or that. Like, you know, maybe it's a little fuzzy in the background. Maybe the colors are a little weird. Maybe this, maybe that. You know what I mean? There's always something going on with the way that the image looks in a dream sequence, typically, that tells you, oh, this is a dream. This isn't actually happening. I have to admit, that's the one thing that Zack Snyder didn't really do well, but he might have had his own reasons for doing it the way he did. That being said, like, a lot of people didn't understand why some things that, you know, were not realistic were supposedly happening, right? They don't understand what is and isn't a dream sequence. Like, quite frankly, there's a dream sequence in the first, 2 or 3 minutes of the movie, and people don't really get that it's a dream sequence. Then there's a bunch of other dream sequences. There's one that calls back to Injustice, Gods Among Us. There's a sequence in the movie. I don't think it's a dream sequence. It's at the end of the movie, but that calls back to another thing that happens in the Superman story. There are shots that call back directly to Frank Miller's Batman, or the Dark Knight, I should say. There are just lots of moments that harken back to like specific moments in the comics and the graphic novels that these characters are attached to. And I have no problem with that, because when I look at that on screen, I'm thinking, ooh, I know what that's from. Ooh, I know what that's from. I've seen that. I've read that. You know, I'm like a kid in a candy store, like, oh my God, all my favorite things are up on the screen right now. So I can't understand why people just like, oh, is this a dream sequence or not? Of course it's a dream sequence. I know he doesn't do a good job of explaining it, but duh! You can tell by how absurd the things are on screen here that yes, it's a dream sequence. Is it possible in real life for this to happen? For this character? No! Then it's a dream sequence! And I mean, oh my goodness. So suffice it to say that I really liked Batman vs. Superman. I give it a 7.5 out of 10. I probably will be getting it on Blu-ray when it comes out. I'm just going to finish this off by saying that everybody thinks that the movie is a failure, but I guarantee you that in the eyes of Warner Brothers, it's not. They're going to call it a failure. They're going to call it a failure for their own purposes so they can make a little bit more money and not have to pay people, essentially, right? But in terms of what they wanted the movie to be, they wanted the movie to be something that would bridge the gap, that would introduce characters for upcoming movies, for the Justice League, for the Wonder Woman movie, even for a potential Flash movie. You know, they wanted to introduce these characters so that they could potentially do movies with them later, and the movie-going audience would be familiar with those characters. I wish that they hadn't gone about it this way. I wish that they had done two separate movies. I think that if there had been a Batman vs. Superman and then a Dawn of Justice movie, it would have been much better. It would have been so much better. I think both movies individually would have been at least 8 out of 10s, but because they had to mash them all up together into one movie, it suffered a little bit as a result of that, because it just doesn't work as well when you put these clearly two different plots and two different things together like that. It just doesn't work as well, alright? But that being said, again, I like the movie. It's just that I wish that they had gone about it a different route. Alright, so that's about all I have to say about Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice. I know a lot of people didn't like it, but it really wasn't that bad, and you need to back off. Let it be its own thing. Let it be the movie that introduces these characters so that when we get to the point where these characters are getting their own movies, next year, Wonder Woman, everybody knows who they are. Everybody goes out to the theater to see it because, oh, that was my favorite part of Batman vs. Superman. And believe me, a lot of people out there are saying that Wonder Woman was their favorite part of Batman vs. Superman. So if their goal with Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice wasn't just to make money, but also to introduce these characters as a form of advertisement, if their goal with this movie was to advertise their upcoming movies, success. Because what they've done is advertised a potential Batman movie, and now that Ben Affleck has said he's directing and writing the movie, people are totally on board for the most part. They're advertising a Wonder Woman movie, which is coming next year, and now that people have seen Gal Gadot, or however you pronounce it, as Wonder Woman, they're down with that, yo. They are down to see some Wonder Woman. They can't wait. I know I can't wait. She was really an excellent part of that movie. So freaking awesome. That's part of the reason I have to believe that they did this movie the way they did it. And yes, maybe it's going to suffer a little bit as a result and not make as much money as it could have potentially if they did both movies separately instead of putting both plot devices in together and just, you know. It might have made more money if they did it the other way around, but that would have taken more time, and they didn't want to take more time to develop this DC Comics franchise. So, you know, I can understand that. I don't agree with it, but I can understand it. I think it's kind of silly, but I can understand it. They don't want to waste more time. And quite frankly, even if it doesn't make back its production budget and its advertising budget, it will still have done its job as an advertising agent to advertise Wonder Woman, to advertise Batman, to advertise the Justice League movie. Now everybody knows that's coming. Now everybody is a little bit more excited for those movies, potentially. I think maybe people are a little bit more soured on Justice League, but especially in the case of Wonder Woman, I think they're going to be down with that. You know, I think as a result of Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice, Wonder Woman is going to make bank at the box office, especially if it's as good as I'm thinking it's going to be. So if they don't fuck up Wonder Woman and they do it right, people are excited to see it thanks to Batman vs. Superman. So you've got the excitement. All you have to do is get it done right, and people will love you again. That's all it's going to take. All right? Now, if we get to Wonder Woman and it ends up sucking and they fuck it up, then I will call them on their bullshit, all right? I will say, you know what? Batman vs. Superman, it wasn't a failure, but as an advertising agent in that case, it was a failure, right? I will call them on that bullshit. I'll say, you know what? You had an excellent opportunity built up by Batman vs. Superman, and you squandered it. I will fully admit to that if and when that happens, but I have high hopes. I have high hopes that Wonder Woman's going to be excellent, that the Justice League movie is going to be excellent, and quite frankly, I also have high hopes for Suicide Squad, even though a lot of people are getting worried about it, but I think it's going to be pretty good. I don't think it's going to be fantastic, but I think I probably am going to rate it about the same as I did for Batman vs. Superman, which is A-okay in my book, 7.5 out of 10. I will take that every day. That is all I'm going to say about this subject. Thanks for watching. Let me know if you want to keep seeing me talking about movies in long form like this for like an hour long in the near future. I know that there are a lot of people who probably, you know, they put these videos on in the background and listen to them kind of like podcasts, right? And I see a lot of people actually engaging with videos like this on my channel. So I'm thinking, well, maybe I need to do more videos like this, you know? And I had a lot to say about Batman vs. Superman, so why not? Okay, that'll do it for me. Thanks for watching, guys. Catch you later. Peace.